One of the questions that I get asked a lot is, should I be texting my ex every day? So today I thought I'd put together a video that really explored that idea, or rather answered that question, but also broke down the situations where you should be texting your ex, or rather how you should be texting them after a breakup, and the situations where you shouldn't be texting your ex. So in my opinion, texting your ex after a breakup is normal behavior, especially if it's done with friendly intentions. However, it can turn into unhealthy behavior if all you want to do is win your ex back and you talking to them hinders your self-development. So let's pull on that thread a little bit. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the following things. Should you be texting your ex every day? The ideal texting trajectory after a breakup, and situations where you shouldn't be texting them. So, should you be texting your ex every day after the breakup? Now, there's a long answer to this and a short answer. So the short answer is no, you shouldn't. The long answer is no, you shouldn't, but it also depends on your overall goals. Now, this is where the situation can become extra complicated. If you have a desire to win your ex back after a breakup, then I think the end goal should be to talk to them every day. But that needs to happen organically. Now, I'll talk about that in a moment, but first I think we need to talk about why I do not believe it's a good idea to be texting your ex every day after a breakup, and it always revolves around attachment styles. So this is the year that I did a ton of research on attachment styles, and really we found that most of our clients exhibit anxious, preoccupied attachment tendencies, while most of our clients' exes exhibit avoidant attachment style tendencies. So what is the difference between the two? Well, someone who has an anxious attachment style is someone who has a core wound where they're afraid of being abandoned. So in many cases, our clients have been abandoned by their exes because their ex just broke up with them. So for them, their worst fear has just come true. This causes them to act extremely desperate to try to fix the situation. Now, on the other hand, an avoidant person is someone who has a very fierce protective mechanism over their own independence. So what you're getting here is someone who wants to fix things and someone who is just enjoying their independence, and the two clash. So one of the reasons that I'm not a fan of texting your ex every day after the breakup is because I think it comes off too much of an anxious behavior. Now, like one of the adjectives that you could use to describe someone who has an anxious attachment style is that they are naggy. And you know what naggy people do? They text you a lot. Now, this may seem like I'm contradicting myself because earlier I just said that the ideal goal for everyone who wants to get an ex back should be to get back on a texting everyday basis with their previous partner. So what gives? Well, I think it's important to look at the overall texting trajectory. I'm going to put a few graphics up on the screen to help emphasize my points. What you're seeing right in front of you right now is what the typical texting trajectory looks like over the lifespan of a relationship. So we have the beginning of the relationship where things are really exciting. Then we have the middle of the relationship where things kind of begin to stagnate. And then finally the end of the relationship where things kind of fall off a cliff. So the reason why that beginning of the relationship is so furious is because oftentimes what's happening is the midst of the honeymoon period. There's so many exciting things to learn about your partner. There's so many things that you want to talk about with them, and you do talk about with them. And this is where often we're finding conversations can last all the way up until 3 a.m. in the middle of the morning, where you just can't get off the phone, and it's just so exciting. But then there's that middle part of the relationship, and this is not necessarily where things stagnate. Maybe on a texting trajectory they do, but you're comfortable. You're happy. You don't feel the need to impress your ex. You are just in the middle of a relationship enjoying things with them. And then of course we get to the end of the relationship where things start to begin to taper off, and ultimately at the end where the breakup occurs, you find that you're not texting them at all. But people often make a major mistake when it comes to the post-breakup period. So we just went through what the texting trajectory looks like throughout the history of a relationship, but let's take a look at what people tend to do after a breakup that is a major mistake. So people, most likely anxious people, what they're going to do after a breakup is they are going to immediately try to text in enter the trajectory from a 0 to 60 type approach. They want to turn it from low to high immediately. And this makes sense because if you are an anxious person, your main goal is to fix things. And the only way to fix things is to talk about things. And the only way to talk about things is to get reassurance. And it just continues to snowball. So you end up texting your ex multiple times a day, maybe to no response. You still keep texting them. This is a mistake. It doesn't work. So what does the ideal trajectory actually look like? All right, so the graphic I have up on your screen right now shows very clearly the taper off of the breakup, but then there's a stagnant period where you really aren't talking to them at all. And then there's the slow ascent to the reconciliation period. This, in my opinion, is what the ideal texting trajectory looks like. Now, a couple of things to note here. The blue section where things seem stagnant, well, that's where the no contact rule is happening. So you aren't talking to them at all during it. Stagnant. But also, I want you to take a look at that green section. Notice how it's not just a furious ascent to the top. Rather, it's sort of this roller coaster approach. You know, you have 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And in terms of texting, it'll probably look something like 2 days where you're texting them in a row, and then 1 day where you don't text them at all. Then 3 days where you're texting them in a row. Then 2 days where you're not texting them at all. You're constantly stair-stepping your way to success. And one of the things that I'm famous for is the concept of tide theory. And tide theory is basically this personified. And I always use the analogy of looking at how a tide goes from high tide to low tide or low tide to high tide. And if you were to stand there every moment of this process, you wouldn't be able to pinpoint the exact moment where it turned from low tide to high tide. It happened organically. It happened in such incremental things that you can't really notice it. That is how you need to start viewing your texting trajectory with your ex. You don't want to be texting them every day. You want to stair-step the approach, slowly have the trend go up, but make it so minuscule that they wouldn't even notice it. And this is why one of the things that I really recommend to my clients is to start charting their texting conversations with their exes so they can see how long the texts are, how often you're texting, things of that nature. But there's still a pretty big piece of the puzzle that we haven't talked about here, and that is looking at the situations where you shouldn't be texting your ex. Now, I could go on for hours about each one of these things, but I don't really have the time or patience to do that today. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to list out the situations and then give a brief explanation behind my thinking behind why I think you shouldn't be texting your ex if you find yourself in this situation. So what are the situations? Well, we have the situation where you have not completed a no contact rule. You have the situation where you haven't outgrown your ex during that no contact rule. Then you have the situations where you don't even really want them back. And then finally, you have the situations where you don't have emotional control for the Zeigarnik effect. All right, so let's take a look at the first situation where you haven't completed a no contact rule. So remember this part of our texting trajectory, that little blue dotted line that I was talking about? Well, that is known as the no contact rule, which I mentioned earlier. Now, if you haven't completed a no contact rule, you shouldn't really be texting your ex. Why? Well, believe it or not, I think it has a direct correlation to the second situation, which I think we'll just go into right now. So the second situation is you haven't outgrown your ex. One of the important facets that we've learned that separates the successful individuals in reconciliation versus the unsuccessful individuals in reconciliation is the ability to outgrow their ex. Most of the time when I would interview our success stories, the one thing I noticed about them was the simple fact that they used the no contact rule to outgrow their ex. They got to this place emotionally where they were okay not getting their ex back. And it really, if you think about it, it's a genius strategy because it helps you when you actually start texting your ex. One of the big issues that most of the people I notice in the private Facebook support group have is they're worried if their ex is going to respond to their text, or they're worried if their ex doesn't respond to their text, or they're worried if their ex does respond to their text, but they don't respond to their text in the right way. All of these things can hurt your mentality and confidence going forward. But if you've outgrown your ex and you're okay if you fail, then these things don't really matter as much to you. Maybe you want them to respond to you, but you don't care if they respond to you. Maybe you want them to have a good conversation with you, but if it doesn't happen, then you're okay. You're not going to lose your confidence because of this one negative thing that's happening. So if you haven't achieved that mentality, then in my opinion, you shouldn't even be thinking about texting your ex, because this is the most important piece of the entire puzzle. And then of course we have the situation where you don't want them back. Arguably the easiest situation to talk about here. So in my opinion, if you have come to the conclusion that you do not want your ex back, and you don't share any children or pets or any reason for why you would be forced to interact with them, it's probably easier for you to get over the breakup by simply not talking to them again. While that may seem harsh, I am in this for your mentality, not your ex's mentality. And I think when it comes to relationships, we just generally are more selfish because we want the best deal possible for us. And I get that you have a need to be kind to your ex and not be rude to them, but sometimes, especially if continuing to engage in an addiction, like thinking about an ex, is going to be a negative for you, it's smarter just to cut it out of your life and drop it. And then we have the final situation, which is a situation where you don't have emotional control and you can't really do the Zeigarnik effect. Now, if you're not familiar, the Zeigarnik effect is a tactic that I teach my clients to use, especially when it comes to texting or phone call conversations. The Zeigarnik effect is really based around a psychological concept heralded by a woman named Bluma Zeigarnik, hence the Zeigarnik effect. And she basically found that people remember interrupted or incomplete tasks better than completed ones. So the thinking is simple. You engage your ex in a really interesting, intriguing conversation. You find the high point of that conversation, and then you leave the conversation, leaving them wanting more. And I've often used the Zeigarnik effect as a way of showing my clients, this is how you get an ex to reach out to you first. You have to kind of earn that over time through momentum. But the trick is, if you don't have emotional control, you can't really use it effectively. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, take a look at this graphic. This graphic basically shows you what the average duration and level of interest is within a conversation. Notice how there's a lot of ebbs and flows to it, but there's clearly a high point to it. Now, ideally, with the Zeigarnik effect, if you didn't have any emotional attachment, you would just find the high point and then suddenly end the conversation. But here's the thing, because you're dealing with an ex, because this person is theoretically someone you want back very badly, it is really hard to leave a conversation that you are thoroughly enjoying. It takes a lot of discipline and emotional control. And if you don't have that discipline or emotional control to basically leave a conversation right at its high point, then in my opinion, you probably aren't fit to be texting your ex just yet.